Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my friends Greg Sterling, Neil Polacek, and John Gerard. Hey guys, how's it going?
Good.
What's happening?
All righty. Well, let's jump into it. We've had an exciting week of lots of interesting things happening in the space of AI. Greg, you want to lead off with your main nugget?
What was my main nugget, Andy? I guess I'll talk about the.
We got a bunch of them today. So
yeah, there's a lot of main nuggets. I'll talk. I guess I'll lead off with the AI overview problems that Google is having. So at the Google Developer Conference a couple of weeks ago, Google I/O. I don't actually have a perception of time anymore. I don't know how long ago things happened, or I think it was a couple of weeks ago. Ahead of the conference, people were anticipating that Google would officially roll out its AI overviews, previously called Search Generative Experience, and they in fact did that. The whole event was about AI in one form or another, but the interesting thing was the AI overviews, which was the thing that people were most focused on, at least in the search world, just was kind of like an afterthought. It was just kind of a throwaway. Yes, and by the way, this is coming out. And, and then there was a subsequent discussion in more detail about how AI would get integrated into search and how it would change search potentially. Now, what's happened since that time is that people have been noticing and documenting on Twitter, in the mainstream press, New York Times had a big article, and there are other places, a lot of errors. It's happening all the time. I'm part of a Slack group, and they have a dedicated Slack channel. AI overview fails, and people are blogging them in there. So there's been a lot of minor and major errors that have been caught by people, and it's a little bit of it's got to be a huge embarrassment actually for Google. I mean, they are sort of defending the position that most stuff is great, works well, and this is a very minor slice of the larger pie. They also, Sundar Pichai, the CEO, gave a bunch of interviews. He also said AI overviews enhance search, and they do, they make the whole search experience better. People love them. People engage with them. They're searching more. And so there seems to be a real contrast between what Google is saying and the PR from coming out of there, and then what people are seeing and experiencing. And what the most egregious AI overview, and I'll stop talking, problem that I saw, unforced error, was the recommendation that, and you probably have seen this because it got a lot of coverage, that people put glue in their pizza sauce to make it tackier, quote unquote. Right?
And so that sauce.
It was in the sauce.
Yeah,
it's that sauce.
You want tacky in the dough, not in the sauce. So
it was literally just how do you stop cheese from sliding off? And the answer was put a non-toxic. It was important that it was non-toxic glue, onto the top of the sauce to help with that problem. So I saw that one too, and that was like the most kind of laughable, hilarious, amazing one, right? So I'm trying to replicate these as they're coming up, and there's some pretty consequential ones, like it's okay to leave a dog in a hot car, like stuff that's not really funny,
yep.
Right? So of course, the first thing I'm trying to do is reproduce these after, seeing all these flubs. When I got to the pizza one, something so interesting happened. So I put in, how do you keep cheese from sliding off pizza? All the other ones had sort of already been cleaned up, and so they didn't. So it actually answered with the same answer, which was to use Elmer's glue. But the reason it did that is because it had already picked up somebody who had made fun of the answer and posted it on a website, and it was using that new website that was literally less than 24 hours old to inform generative AI answer. So it was
unironically.
So, it was unbelievable.
Well, was it sponsored by Elmer's or something? And
that was not a hallucination because it was out there.
Technically not, right? Technically not.
Number two was not a hallucination. The first one might have been, but number two certainly wasn't.
Right. So as I understand it, that you can leave the dog in the car was actually pulling from like a Beatles lyric or something weird like that. Like it was an attributable source. Like there was something out there that said this that, presumably seemed, authoritative enough. But yeah, just wild. And actually one thing I'll mention before I shut up, I thought what was fascinating about this is that this so quickly overshadowed what really probably should have been the big disruption here, which is, does this generative search result thing destroy SEO as we know it? And that like almost disappeared in the hand wringing and discussion about these errors in the results. But that's actually a really, really big deal too.
That seems by design, though. I don't think that Google wants to promote that SEO is dead or, anything close to that, because they don't really know, it seems like, what is going to happen next in search. And so this is kind of their bet that they're making right now. They have to do something to answer back to the instant answers that you get from Perplexity or ChatGPT. So they have to do something, because after you start using ChatGPT or Perplexity, the last thing you want to do is start wading through 10 links that look antiquated now. So they have to answer to that, and it's a really precarious position. But when you fast forward through that, the natural question is SEO dead? What happens to SEO?
I can sort of dispose of that very quickly. So It depends on how you define. It depends on how you define SEO. If you define SEO as a certain set of tactics that have come to be used by a lot of content marketers to manipulate Google search results or rank higher according to certain kinds of best practices, yes. I mean, I think this changes things. But SEO, if you define it as a discipline that's about optimizing content and optimizing websites for exposure, then no, it'll just adapt. It'll evolve.
Exposure, relevance, importance,
right, it'll evolve.
Not just, it's got to be good content and relevant content and authoritative content.
Well, let me ask this. I mean, so my big question around it has been, I'd be curious what you guys think, that like, so many of these sites, they rely on people landing on the site, right? Like that's the way their funnel works.
That's a more interesting question.
Yeah.
So let me give you a kind of anecdotal example of something that may become more common. Neil and I are trying to decide on using a survey tool. So SurveyMonkey is the default because that's the brand, but I was trying to do some due diligence. So I found an article on, I think, Tech Radar or some site that did a detailed comparison of these two SurveyMonkey and another tool. I copied all the text, I put it in ChatGPT, and I asked it to summarize the comparison, and it did that. It was still pretty extensive. And then I started asking a bunch of questions. Does it have this? Does this one have this? At what price can I get this? So it essentially took the information in the article and it allowed me to manipulate it and get my questions answered rather than reading that article on that site and getting those ad impressions.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And I think that kind of thing, at least I'm doing that a lot.
That's
and
pretty
I think
disruptive for the ad model.
Super disruptive for publishers. I mean, hugely.
I won't see that ad at all. I mean, I don't want to take I don't want to take ad revenue from publishers, God knows. But it's just much easier and more efficient for me to not read that person's article in the way that it's been structured, to get ChatGPT to summarize it and then to ask my questions of that article.
But if the ad model goes away, then that content won't be there for you to source to do what you just did. So it's
one of the big questions I had, which is sort of what is the incentive, especially for publishers, to go and create this content if this is the outcome. Now, and I've seen some speculation. I tend to think this might be where things go. That right now, if you look at the conversion rates around folks who use content to bring people in. Of course, they have a ton of people who are not buyers. That's the way it works, is that like, I'm looking for this information. This site has it. I have no intent of buying anything or doing anything with my click other than learning about what's there. I think if I have decided to buy, I'm going to have to click through to a site. Generative AI isn't going to sell me something. I'm going to have to click through to a site to consummate. So yeah, that's a good point. So for now, if that's the case, then it may actually end up being that clicks to the websites collapse, but the conversion rates expand, to a similar degree, meaning I get a lot less people who come to my site, but the people who do come are actually there because they may be buyers. How does that help a publisher? I don't know that it does.
Transactions, then they're probably going to be whole, perhaps.
I mean, presumably this also this drives up the price of ad units if this plays out this way, right? So like everybody's, all ad units are based at some level around what the conversion is that somebody can get against, putting that ad against this set of keywords. And if all of a sudden that conversion rate goes up by 10x because whatever, then you would expect the market to respond by the price of that unit going up by 10x at some point. I don't know, just I speculate.
So the traffic becomes more valuable to a publisher.
Right.
Sell it for a higher value, naturally.
Yes.
And what will need to happen in that experience is that your user experience is going to need to get elevated as well. Like publishers are going to have to do something to create a better user experience than overlaying, 5 different pop-up ads when you're clicking on a mobile link to an article, and all you want is the recipe for how to
Yeah, that's the recipe blog scenario. And
I don't need like all these pop-ups popping up at me.
Oh my God, 2 video units and the pop-ups, and you're scrolling through 15 different tile ads, and it's just, my solution to that, my solution to that is I always go to print if they have a print button. And print gives you a largely ad-free version, video-free, typically.
You can just do a recipe search now in ChatGPT and ignore.
Yeah, but you can't trust it. You can't trust it.
Too much Elmer's glue. Too much Elmer's glue.
Sauce is fine from ChatGPT.
Did you made a low risk cooking investment.
Small. Barbecue.
Just don't ask it for pizza.
I know well enough that what the ingredients should be, so I knew it was going to be okay.
Let's segue a little bit real quick, if you don't mind. So here's what's on the cusp of all of this stuff. That's sort of the elephant in the room. Nobody's really talking about it just yet. You see some articles that are leading to it, but from what it sounds like, Apple and OpenAI are about to put a partnership together. And when that happens, you have all of your data that's on your Apple devices behind an LLM that can create some magical experiences for the user. A lot of this kind of stuff that we're talking about, in fact, can really just be serviced up in an ad-free environment. And Apple's position already is they've historically looked to kill the cookie and kill all kinds of tracking. So
tracking, yeah.
This goes right in line with that. What do you guys think about what's about to happen?
So I have a quick question first. Let me ask this question.
Yeah.
So Andy, when you say all of your data's there, I assume they're talking about putting something on the handset itself and it's not going up to the cloud, because that flies right in the face of Apple's whole privacy proposition. If all your data is going up to the cloud, people are going to be very wary of that. So I just wanted to clarify that was that what you were implying?
I think so. I mean, I don't know exactly what the implementation is going to be, but it seems that, everybody knows that Siri is a terrible experience currently, and we've all experienced the great experience of OpenAI or Perplexity or any of these AI platforms. So how it's going to be implemented, maybe it becomes a toggle switch with the user to say, I want to access the cloud for more current information, or maybe there are updates where it's a library update that gets updated periodically on your device. Not sure.
Yeah, that's the speculation right now, is that it's both on device and cloud-based, and that they're going to keep the stuff associated with private or personal information on device, and that they'll use the cloud side for current stuff that you need to get off of the internet. Search. They also talk about, like, for this would be kind of I don't know how they would justify this, but they're talking about for resource intensive tasks that they might try to move some of that processing to the cloud. That seems to me to get a little fuzzy, but their public stance on this has been, we're going to keep all of it on device, or as much of it on device as we possibly can.
What, doesn't somebody in the Google Apple world write someone else a really big check every year?
They do. I was wondering about that. It's a really good point. And what's fascinating about that is that if Microsoft is the native search in ChatGPT, what happens in that use case when
that's a back door into Apple devices?
Well, and I mean, that check that Google writes, I think it's Google who writes the check.
20 billion.
That's a
20
very
billion
large
a year.
check. And they
Yeah,
must get more than 20 billion back from that check, right?
Well, they're getting
Well,
they're getting it in the
yeah,
form of the value of the data and search advertising
Right.
revenue.
and I think sort of maintaining monopoly status as, number one search engine, which may or may not matter, or won't matter as much potentially right now.
Well, this is a kind of a natural segue into another topic, but I don't want to go off this too quickly because this is
Don't
a
you
really
think
interesting.
that's
Go
going to
ahead.
be a very hard conversation over there and negotiation?
Yeah.
Like,
No, it's a contract.
Well,
It's a
maybe
contract.
Microsoft writes that $20 billion check going forward, and Microsoft says, "Hey, we're gonna just step right in front of Google here."
So
I
so
wonder,
Google is the default search engine for the Safari browser.
correct.
That's where it lives. Google has its own apps that can be downloaded onto the iPhone, and they want you to download their apps directly. But it lives on Safari. Siri has existed for a long time. Google is apparently very threatened by the prospect of Siri becoming, Apple developing a search tool itself, whether or not integrated into Siri. So there's been this tension for a long time, and Google has successfully prevented Apple from developing its own full-blown search capability. ChatGPT will bring a version of that, but we don't know exactly what the scope of that is, to Apple. And undoubtedly that will have more success than Apple's own native efforts to get people to engage with Siri or whatever it calls its search. I forget what it calls its search tool, which is both sort of kind of quasi web search and native on device search.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating. I mean, everybody I think has known, it's the sort of most open secret out there that Google has not been able to diversify revenue away from that core sort of search and ad revenue.
Well, cloud.
Yeah, a little bit, right? I mean, so maybe not quite to the degree that somebody like Amazon has done. And so, yes, I think that creates, some counterweight to the potential blows they're going to take on the search side. But it is interesting to kind of see, like, gosh, of all of the projects that they've tried, is there anything besides cloud that's actually gotten enough traction to really show up as a line item on the
well, I
income
mean,
statement?
there's YouTube revenue, which is not. I mean, search and YouTube revenue are separate. YouTube has been pretty successful, not as successful as search.
And I would sort of lump those together. Maybe that's not fair.
I mean, there's a search component and a discovery component on YouTube. Right. So
fair, good point. So I just think it's amazing that, like, certainly the inability to diversify revenues has been a theme around Google forever. Is this the point where that really, 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 really hurts and is problematic? And, probably. It's
Greg and I have been debating this whole notion of how much traffic moves off of Google search for local over time. And, who knows what that's going to be.
What do you think? I mean, here's a question I have. Do you if I think about it, I was just talking to some guys about this morning, like my own search habits. I think that local search is the only thing I still use Google for. I don't use it for anything else, but I actually do use it for local.
Yes, because nobody else has the quote unquote local knowledge graph that Google has. And if you listen to their keynote at their I/O conference, they didn't explicitly talk about local. They didn't say, hey, this is how AI will impact local results in particular. But almost, I would say, a majority of the use cases and examples that their speakers gave were local examples. I'm trying to get to this store. I got to do this with my kids. Yeah. And they have the best local data set by far. I mean, Bing is okay, but they have the best local data set by far beyond anybody else. I mean, Apple is starting to develop its own, they have their Maps has a bunch of data, but they don't have the depth of data that Google has. And so it is Google's real competitive advantage.
Didn't we do that donut search on Perplexity, Greg, that was pretty good and all fun, backed by Yelp, right?
Yes. So Perplexity is using licensing the Yelp API. And so they have Yelp data, but it's still, I think Google is still going to be in command of local searches, which they say represent only 30% or a third, 33%, whatever, of their search volume, which I don't accept. I think it's a higher percentage when you consider local intent. But if that's true and everything else is going to go away, they're going to be SOL, but everything else won't go away in reality.
Yeah, by the way, this is interesting. It actually is kind of related to what we were just talking about in terms of having on-device, LLMs where you're, sitting on top of all this personal data. So one of the problems I think Google appears to be solving well around this local search. When you're doing typical generative AI, you're sort of looking at unstructured data and providing kind of a semi-structured response. But local data is highly structured, right? It's information about geography, and it's classified as a certain type of restaurant or a certain type of business. It's got all the additional fields and attributes surrounding it. And actually, straight out of the box, generative AI does quite poorly with structured data. If you give it a huge table of 50,000 rows and say, hey, tell me something interesting about this data, it actually can't do it. The way that people solve that problem is they have the generative AI write queries that then run against that data. So they translate that question into a query, run it against that data, and then have the generative AI look at that table and provide an English response. So that solution is almost certainly at the heart of the way that Google is handling generative results for local, and it probably will be what Apple has to do to provide interesting responses on device. So if I say, hey, I want to know all the people in my contacts that are, from West Virginia, if you use this, the kind of pure generative AI response to that, it's going to just make a whole bunch of stuff up. It's going to hallucinate a whole bunch of people from my contact list. You have to use a slightly different technical approach. And I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see on the local side with Google how far they're able to take that. Like how much really interesting stuff can get generated out of their local graph, their local business graph with these queries.
They haven't done anything interesting with their AI overviews versus what you see in the sort of local map pack. They just presented a kind of a 2/3 replication of what existed below and some more elaborate description, but they really haven't done anything particularly interesting with it.
Yeah.
Let's fast forward now just 2 years, right? And imagine in these 2 years, AI assistants are going to be, a thing. They're going to really, this is kind of like the next generation of where AI goes, presumably. This is what we're all reading about. If you imagine 2 years out and then look back, right now we're kind of looking at search based on where we are today, naturally, and how it's changing. But if you look forward a little bit, and you kind of imagine what user experiences will be like, and then look back at what were some of the shifts that impacted those user experiences, I wonder, and I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are, but utilizing whether it's local graph data or how AI might impact different SaaS models, how there might be, different applications that may appear in, whether it's new GPTs that are for sale that will create, new business models like an app store kind of thing. What do you guys think in terms of, where all this goes, especially as it pertains to assistance?
That's a very question, open-ended question there.
Right? I mean, there's a lot there, but it's interesting to kind of think about this a year or two out, knowing that there are going to be a lot of changes that are coming up, and how those are going to impact user experience. Personally, for me, I feel like there's going to be this dynamic web that starts to emerge, right? So it becomes, right now we read static pages by and large. Yes, you can check out airline, dynamic data that comes from a database and update it that way. But it feels to me like there's going to be this dynamic web experience that will change based on your interests.
Yeah, I think, I would say two things jump out at me. The first one is kind of related to what we were just talking about, which is AI still is not great in its current state at kind of reviewing and summarizing structured information unless you give it very explicit instructions about how to do that. Like a friend I was talking to this morning said, hey, can you remind me if NVIDIA stock is in the top 10 of in terms of market cap as of today? And, Perplexity couldn't handle that. ChatGPT can't handle that. And it has partly to do with, the currency of the information, but it has a lot more to do with the fact that we all know there are very good sources of structured information that would help us to answer that question that, these systems are not doing a very good job. And, I would argue that, a third or half of all business data information that is useful in our decision making is of that structured variety. And to the degree that AI is not able to answer questions well, pulling information out of that structured stuff, that's potentially a big problem. So I would say that's one category. And then the second category I would say is, and this is the way that I think agents will maintain my interests over time. We talked before about like the switching costs are so low right now. Like I just stopped using ChatGPT and started using Perplexity, and I'm like 90-10 in it. In one day, I almost entirely abandoned ChatGPT. So I think that there is very likely to be ways for these agents to sort of maintain state and memory about what I've done and learn and get better over time. And
so
I think
it locks you into that experience.
Locks you into it. And I think this is showing up right now, sort of first and foremost in the coding side, as people are using AI assistants for coding. There's sort of hints that this, ability to kind of track how it is that I use the system and keep track of state and keep track of the code that's already been developed. Like that's the kind of thing that I think generates, even more value. Like if I can come into my assistant and not have to tell it all over again what I just talked about yesterday, like that's a game changer that I think is coming as well.
Google is promoting a. Go ahead, Neil.
Well, Andy, you asked about SaaS, and we were sort of on local, and Greg and I have been thinking about, what does that mean there? And I think it means that whatever tools that are out there for these local businesses are going to have to be, the potential in 2 years is that they're going to be way simpler to use, way easier to use on the business owner. And I think the take-up rate could be really considerable, because even though, SaaS is better than what was around 15 years ago, it's still complicated and it's still hard. And the number one sort of thing in our survey, Greg, wasn't it about ease of use? That's what they're looking for.
Right. Well, small business owners make buying decisions based on ease of use and value.
Yeah.
Perceived value.
So, you could see these things being really inexpensive and really easy to use and hugely disruptive to everybody else who's put something into the market heretofore. So big risks.
My view is that in the at least in the search context, let me quickly, I'll mention that Perplexity was compared against Bing, Gemini, ChatGPT, and maybe Claude, I think Claude, by the Wall Street Journal. And they did a bunch of, queries and tests. And I can't tell you the particular ones off the top of my head, but they found Perplexity to be the winner, the overall winner. That was their conclusion, which I thought was really interesting, better than Gemini. Didn't compare it against Google proper, but Gemini. I think that in the Google case, everybody wants to know, is Google going to lose traffic and revenue and blah, blah, blah. And I think in the Google case, I think there's a more, Google survived mobile. And Sundar Pichai keeps talking about that in an indirect way. Right. He talked about how people were similarly upset when there was a transition from desktop to mobile, and it was this disruptive time, and people were, up in arms as they are today about AI disrupting SEO and so on and so forth. But really the subtext there is Google went from being a desktop centric company to the dominant mobile company. And we successfully navigated that transition. Steve Jobs was saying people don't use search anymore. They use apps, right? The idea was go directly to the source, cut out the middleman. But Google totally survived that transition. Really impressive if you look at it through that narrow lens. And they're trying to do, and they're confronting it again, right? And I think the vulnerability for Google really lies in maybe I'm not answering your question, but this is what's coming out of my mouth. The vulnerability for Google lies in informational queries. I may have said this before. 70 to 80% of all search volume is around informational queries, right? Yep. how do I make how do I keep the cheese from sliding off the pizza? And, a smaller percentage are navigational, meaning I'm going directly to find something. And, another percentage are transactional. I want to buy those shoes. And so the top of the funnel stuff is where Google is vulnerable, I think, because these AI engines, whatever we want to call them, assistants, are very good at quickly getting you information. Depends on the use case, depends on the complexity of the information. But that's where I think Google could see some erosion. But by having said that, I don't underestimate Google's ability to survive by partly through innovation, but a lot through leveraging its monopoly position and keeping people kind of connected to its universe, right? I mean, that's what they've relied on in the recent past.
You wrote about how many users of Google Gmail are there, Greg? In Workspace?
Oh, well, Google Workspace has something like 9 million paying users, but they claim that they have 3 billion users. It's probably Google Docs and Gmail. It's Gmail primarily, I think. And so they have this is a longer discussion than we have time for, but they have a really interesting opportunity with Workspace and SAS and Gemini that we can talk about another time. But that's pretty interesting.
3 billion Android devices out there too. I mean,
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly right.
They're not going away anytime soon, I think, is the conclusion.
Not at all.
Clearly not. What could be interesting, and it's going to be very interesting to see how these assistants roll out in the marketplace, but you could see where an App Store environment could lend itself, or a Google Play environment could lend itself to several different assistants in a similar, use the same infrastructure, use the same, ontology and categorization that they have to create assistants that are, just add-ons to your mobile devices as a next step that does a lot of the stuff that you just mentioned, John, that has the historical memory that's got built into it, and also layers on, all kinds of other functionality that takes structured data that makes it natural language processing friendly, or you can ask it a quick question.
And that becomes the new SEO, right? In a certain way.
Very well.
Optimizing. I mean, people talked about that sort of round one with voice search and how do you optimize content for voice search, longer queries, et cetera, et cetera. I think this assistant model is very, very interesting. Travel assistant, work assistant. You have 3 or 4 assistants that are sort of persistent assistants, and you come back to them periodically depending on your needs. And so your travel assistant will, I want to plan a trip to Hawaii, and I need this and this and this and this, and I want it to look like this. I want to stay in this kind of general area. And it goes out while you sleep, essentially, and retrieves all the information, presents it to you in a structured way. That relieves the burden of having to do travel planning using Google, or using even a more specialized tool like TripAdvisor, Expedia, whatever, Booking.com, because the cognitive load that's involved in trying to sift through all the crap, the good information, the bad information, the ads, the non-ads. Is this blog any good? How do I know? Blah, blah, blah. It's just painful. And I think the opportunity for assistance is to really, or any of these AI tools, is to really cut through the inefficiency of a lot of the planning that we're doing today. And I think that's going to be a big area potentially.
Yeah, this is the place where we run into the issues I was talking about earlier around searching
structured
data. Yeah. And it's like, as humans, we do this so intuitively, we don't even know that we're actually doing it. But again, AI is not great at this yet. Like, it's not. In fact, actually, I think you could make the case that you're almost better off sort of doing more expert system or algorithmic stuff for some of these planning tools, and then let the AI just sort of chime in with something in plain
fill
English,
in the background.
Yeah. Like it's sort of like we're at that. I don't want to say we're at a standstill as it pertains to these agents doing good stuff with structured data, but it's a little bit, it's pretty off right now. And I would also say, like, in terms of like whatever it is that Apple does on the device with Siri and OpenAI, like they of course have a reputation for delivering things that are magical. Like, if you look at the Vision Pro experience as compared to like Oculus, like it's just like it's a different level of wow that they deliver. So I actually think they're going to do something here. Like I think something they're going to deliver that Apple magic in some way, shape, or form, and it's going to partially or maybe even mostly solve this structured data thing. And I think that we'll get a lot of insight based on what they do.
Well, and if that's an issue today, won't it be solved in the near term, John? The structured data?
I don't know. This is one of those things, like AI is evolving so quickly. My big question is, well, why hasn't this been solved better already, given how fast everything else is moving? Like we have AI creating complete 60-second commercials with video and audio that's quite consistent and beautiful. And we haven't fixed this structured data problem. Like it seems like an obvious thing that given the pace of innovation, would have been solved if it could have been solved. And so I think it's going to require, something else other than the tool set we've got at our disposal right now.
We're probably almost at time. Maybe we have time for one or two more things. I just wanted to add a sort of throw in something, which is that at Google's developer conference, they showed a thing which didn't get a lot of attention and subsequently hasn't, called AI organized pages. And these are supposed to be customized dynamic pages. There's probably templates behind them. Dynamic pages that respond to your query. So you get a different page for shopping and a different page for travel and a different page for health and a different page for restaurants, right? And so, we haven't been able to look at those because they're not live. But that's an example of Google potentially, hypothetically at least, combining algorithmic search and AI to produce something which is very personalized. And that, to me, was a more radical kind of announcement in a way, depending on what shows up, than, anything else that they showed. Because if Google can transform search into something that looks, that blends the benefits of structured data, algorithmic, analysis,
and feels
with
personal.
AI, and it makes it more personal. That's right. And, that is amazing.
That he's trying to solve that. Now he's trying to solve the grant writing business, which Greg's wife knows about and my wife knows about. And that's equally laborious. And he's trying to solve that. So that was really interesting to me. And the third one was this guy who's built a platform for ad agencies to essentially recreate the brand, like you create a brand persona as the AI thing. And then you tell it you want to do this with that brand persona of things. They're all over the place, I'm sure, because you're going to learn a lot of stuff. It was really, really interesting. And Greg, I'm going to drag Greg across the bay next time with me because I think he'd find
it feels very much early days of the internet again.
Yeah,
it sure does. It sure does. Except with all the internet history behind us.
Yeah, which is fantastic, and all the connectivity and all the scalability and the cloud capability and all of that. It's really exciting.
In as we're kind of rounding the bend here, and in the spirit of fun stuff to do with AI, we were talking before we got on about Greg and I have both stumbled independently into using ChatGPT as a language tutor, and I got to say, like that experience reminds me, Neil, what you're talking about with the dinner time conversation use case, but just like this sort of unexpected delight at being able to give ChatGPT, and actually, I don't know, Greg, if you use the voice version, you must use the voice version.
Yeah, that's what I had to do. I had to do it.
Yeah,
it's too much for me to type in broken French.
Yes, exactly. So I did that. I did it for French and for Spanish both, and I gave it instructions saying, if I say something incorrect, please tell me in English what I said incorrectly, and then give me the correction in French. And it
works. It works. That's the amazing thing. It's totally amazing.
So try that out.
And this, this was the promise of all these virtual assistants. Microsoft and Apple and Samsung. This what we're seeing now was what those things were supposed to be, but it's now. Well, I think Apple bought Siri in 2011 or something. I don't know. It was like 14 years ago or 13 years ago. It's a long time ago. It's taken a long time, but we've arrived.
One thing I'll cinch it all up with, thematically, everything that we talked about today, really at the core of it is all about personalization in this next wave.
That's efficiency. And
efficiency, for sure.
But isn't ours the same? Personalization means it was really efficient in figuring out for me.
In that moment. Yeah.
I'm not going to take the bait and debate that with you, but we'll just say yes for now.
All right, guys. Great conversation. Tune in next time
All right.
for more four guys talking about AI. Thank you.